Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Bridge Podcast. Woo! I was expecting that. Okay, if you are just joining us for the first time, you're welcome. You are our MVP for today. And if you are a returning audience, we love you. Thank you for sticking with us.
Real ones, day ones.
Mm-hmm. You're a G. And so this is where we have real, interesting, and transformative conversations about intimate partner violence prevention and also healthy relationships. And we're so excited to have you here with us today. And so today's episode is very special and interesting because we're diving into a subject that is both deeply personal and very historical. And we're talking about wounds of history. We're talking about understanding post-traumatic slave syndrome. We're talking about Black love. And because it's Black History Month, that's why you see us wearing black and yellow. I don't know if you can spot Jen's pin right there, but it's about Black History Month. And the month of February is also a month where we celebrate a day for love, and that's Valentine's. And I remember Vanity was telling me yesterday that it's just one day of love, and then many people forget the fact that it's Black History Month and they just only focus
for
on
the whole month
on Valentine's. But this is Black History Month, and this is also a month where we talk about like the resilience, the strength of the Black community, and that's why today's topic is very essential. Plus, we are in a new dispensation where, there is a ban on DEI and also speculations about the fact that Black History Month is to be canceled in federal agencies. But all the same, we got you. And that's why we're bringing this conversations today. And so we're discussing, like I said, wounds of history, slavery, segregation, and all that, and how they show up in intimate relationships. So if you've never heard of PTSS, that's post-traumatic slave syndrome, this is the best place for you to know about it. So
all right,
we're diving into the themes, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go.
Yeah, so what even is PTSS? PTSS was coined by a doctor, Dr. Joy Degruy. And it says that it's a theory that explains the etiology of many of the adaptive survival behaviors in African American communities throughout the U.S. and the diaspora. So essentially that is many things, many behaviors, our ideals, and even the systemic racism that goes on is derived from slavery. And while we're talking about it in like a research format in academia, but we've also heard this in social situations as well, where we say like, during slavery, this is what was going on. And there's a lot of talk about, slavery is done, slavery has been gone, I wasn't the person that did this, or I wasn't a slave, or things like that. But this theory here kind of talks about our behaviors today, even if, quote unquote, that kind of slavery, to be very clear, that kind of slavery, chattel slavery, isn't going on right now that we know of in America. There are still aspects of our behaviors, especially in the Black community. There's aspects of our ideology that still derives from slavery. And we hear a lot about that in our social situations, in our relationships, but also systemically. Have you guys heard things about that as well? Have you guys heard people talk about that in that way?
Yeah, of course. And I think there was one show that I just saw a clip of one time where a girl was being harassed in her school, and that's when she was talking about like vestiges of slavery and all of that. And some people were like, "Oh, slavery is over. I mean, you need to get over it." And that's one thing that I hear like around a lot. Like, this thing is over. It's been 200 and how many years ago, but then you need to get over it. But then people don't get over it like that, especially because it's passed down from generation to generation. So yeah,
absolutely, I would agree. I think that historical concept of it and like that longevity, right? So it started off with slavery, but we see like how you mentioned chattel slavery might have ended, but there was still other forms that was created to really dismantle the Black community along with other communities of color, right? So we had Jim Crow laws and things of that nature, or either policies or practices being like redlining or things of that nature. We see how that has impacted generational wealth. We've seen how that has impacted education. We've seen how that has impacted a lot of different aspects that's really needed to create a well-being within the society. Right. So when we talk about like, okay, yeah, slavery was a long time ago, a lot of the civil rights movements our grandparents were part of.
Ruby Ridges is still alive.
You know what I'm saying? So it's not as distant as, you know, it's made to believe. Even you know, some of these things being viewed to us in black and white, that's intentional to make it seem like we're like disconnected.
Right.
We're not.
Right.
We're not. Our grandparents, great-grandparents, they still impact how our families have operated, and they are still working, if not have worked, under the guidelines of that they have grown up with, which is what we just discussed, all of these policies and practices that were meant to dismantle our communities.
Right.
So it's important that we look at that longevity.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. I absolutely think that's super important because it's happening to many of us, especially up here in America, where race, socioeconomic status, like those things are so important. And a lot of people who get hired in certain places, who have education, who's in poverty, like a lot of those peoples are black and brown people. And so it's just important for us to really look at like, okay, well, why is this even happening? And to make it just more personal for audience who are just like, that was still a long time ago and things like that, I wanted to really think about generations of people, not to get too off topic, right? But when we're talking about generations, what is something, I want you guys to think about, this is for the audience, I want you guys to think about what is something that has been in your bloodline for so long that you still do today. So maybe it doesn't have to be something negative. Like we're talking about slavery, which is such a heavy topic, but let's just wrap our minds around things that actually happened that has been in your family for so long, right? Maybe it's marriage. Maybe your great grandmother was married, and now every single one of your family members are married by 28, 29, right? Maybe like that is a form of something happening. That is a form of something happening in the 1800s that started so long ago and is still continuing to happen today. Behaviors that are still happening. We still want to have love in our family. Oh, everyone has kids at 20 something and this still today. Like those are the examples that happen to people's families. So when we're talking about slavery, we're not saying that chattel slavery is happening today. We're saying that there are behaviors that are still formed and still happening today that has derived from slavery. So I hope that's making sense.
No, it does, and I really like that question that you posed to the audience. Yeah. I'm excited to get your everyone's feedback on that.
Comment. That's a great breakdown.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, one of the things I want to talk about is, first of all, just like education. So what are some of the things that affect Black love? Sorry, let me run it back a little bit. One of the things I want to talk about is Black love and just how the post-traumatic slave syndrome and that theory affects Black love in our community. And when I'm talking about Black love, let me just be clear. I'm talking about romantic relationships. I'm also talking about the Black love that you have with yourself, the love that you have for yourself, and love that you have in your family, and how that impacts these. And some of the things that impact them, one of the main things is poverty. I was reading an article and we've already this article. One of the authors was our advisor, Noah St. Ville. And in the article, it talks about post-traumatic slave syndrome. And one of the things they discuss is the patriarchal nuclear family. So like the man is the head of the household, the female is the person that typically stays home, takes care of the children, and does X, Y, Z. And just this idea that people are really trying to, specifically the Black community, there are many people that want to get to this hierarchy, right? They want to get to the patriarch of the man is the person, he's the breadwinner, he makes all the money, and the woman is the person that stays home.
The American dream.
Yes, the American dream, right? And so while that might be your dream or whoever's dream, right, that's fine. But what happens is when you can't meet that, right? And so when we go back to slavery, a lot of people today are talking, especially in romantic relationships, are talking about that patriarchy that's happening. But where did we actually see that patriarchy? In typically white slave owners' household. And so Black men actually did not have the ability to they didn't have the resources, the ability, or the option to be the breadwinner because they were also slaves along with black women, which means that black women and black men were working, right? And so in this article, she touches on how even after slavery, so now they don't have any resources in slavery, and then after slavery is quote unquote abolished or abolished and we now don't have chattel slavery, they also have consistent barriers that doesn't allow them to get paid the same wages as white men and don't allow them to own homes and things like that. And so there's these economic barriers that's not allowing them to even be the breadwinner, on top of the fact that the woman is actually not staying home. The woman is actually, the black woman is not staying home. The black women are actually also working. They're just working
domestic work,
which did not really did not change as much from slavery. This is still deriving from slavery because black women were still doing domestic work in slavery as well as working the fields. But black women were also working domestic work, and so now they're getting paid, but they're not getting paid the wages to live by, which is still happening today. And so that's one aspect of just being in poverty doesn't allow a lot of black families to get in a position where they can have that nuclear family if they so want that in a healthy way, right? And so that affects black love because now we have issues where people are upset with each other, and we have the issues in the family where if society is saying that the man should be the provider, but he's not being allowed, he's not getting the resources, he's not having the opportunity to actually be the provider, there's a lot of resentment in the home because now the woman is working and also expected to come home and take care of the kids. And where are we still seeing that today?
Yeah,
we're still seeing that resentment today. We're still having those same conversations today. Well, why aren't men working and taking care of the household? Why aren't women doing X, Y, Z? Instead of us coming together. So that's one example of how slavery, how post-traumatic slave syndrome shows us that this is an ongoing issue, this ongoing resentment that is happening. But then we also do have that resilience factors of women and men who decide that they're going to work together.
Yeah,
and they're going to figure it out. So we have definitely like a lot of research, but we also do have the aspect that men and women, there are men and women that are decided, we're going to work together, we're not going to go with what society says we have to do, and we're going to be partners in this and decide to build. Yeah, so that was a pretty long example of what this looks like now compared to how it's derived from slavery. There's other examples, very large examples, systemic racism, and what that looks like is the system would be education, higher education, housing, redlining, and just multiple ways in which black men and black women and black people in the community are constantly receiving barriers.
Yeah, so I want to piggyback off that because I think we talked about a lot about like those economic disparities and how those challenges within a societal context really puts a wedge between in developing relationships, and a lot of research backs that up. But I think also what we should acknowledge is that it also puts a burden on this community in order to like really find ways to cope with systematic racism, and it also really damages the self-image of the community, right? And so I think that in I don't think research is showing that having to cope with racism and the historical trauma has led to, certain strategies that we have been adapted to survive. And even images correlating with, like historical images correlating with like the Jezebels, right? Or the Hussies, or just the over hypersexualization of black women, how that impacts relationship dynamics within this community. Also, in regards to black men, being portrayed as this overly aggressive, violent, person, or unintelligent, or the list goes on. We know that these are all stereotypes that are completely false, right? These narratives impact the relationship dynamics and how this population maneuvers within their communities. I also want to discuss government interference as well. I know, so I'm taking this a little bit away, but when we talk about historical trauma, we have to acknowledge that the government's hand in that. And the thing that I think about the most is that awful no man in the house rule that was implemented in the 1960s. And what that did was it prevented adult men from being in a house with mothers who had children who received assistance. Now, that goes back to your point about, this population not being able to support themselves within the traditional nuclear family. And then having to rely on welfare assistance. But because they have to rely on that, they have to follow these rules.
Right.
These rules that are intentionally made to dismantle the nuclear family. So you know how it's all coming back together, right? So the images, the adaptive strategies, the governmental policies, all these things have impacted along the way from starting from the chattel slavery all the way up until now, have impacted how this community perceives relationships and how they maneuver in them.
Continues to do so.
We have to acknowledge these things, and these things are rooted all in racism.
Right.
All rooted in racism. So, and then just going into just intergenerational trauma, right? So we talk about enslavement, we talk about segregation, we talk about systematic racism, and how those have created layers of trauma passed through generations. We talk about all of these things. But going back again to those adaptive strategies, it also has created hyper-independence. AKA strong Black women. Okay, we talked about that in previous episodes. We talked about it several times in episodes.
Of course.
That notion is formed out of resilience, but it still does impact us. But we need to understand why it was developed. Right. This wasn't developed on some, forget everybody, we doing what we do. No, this is a strategy that was made for survival. And Black women's resilience, although, I wish we didn't have to have so much resilience, Black women's resilience is what created a lot of these quote unquote stereotypes, but no one looks at, why Black women are doing these things. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge, going back again to this historical intergenerational
instead of just
trauma.
placing that blame,
Instead of just placing the blame,
why
are you acting like this?
Yeah, there are things in depth that are responsible for that.
Exactly. So we talk about the strong Black woman. We talk about, emotional suppression, right? And we talk about mistrust. Again, everything's on a case-by-case basis. I'm not saying that every couple experiencing this or every relationship, this is always derived from that, but it's important for us to recognize that it does have an impact on this community and how we don't really have that ability to cope with a lot of things because, again, we are maneuvering through systematic oppression.
And can I also just add that one of the hugest reasons, and Degruy talks about this in her book, which you guys should definitely get, in her book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, is one of the hugest things that she noticed is that when she went to Africa, I can't remember exactly where she went in Africa right this second, but when she actually went there wasn't the space or the feeling of so much like typically racism, right? There wasn't that huge feeling of it, and the same kind of issues and situations that she experienced in America, because in that country where she was in, the country had acknowledged how it's impacted, how slavery, how taking people from their homes impacted that country. They had acknowledged that, and then they had I believe they provided reparations as well. And so that stuff wasn't so it wasn't that they just acknowledged it, it also wasn't continually happening in that country. Whereas in America, this is why it's still so embedded in our culture and in our system and in our communities, is because it hasn't been acknowledged. And not only has it been acknowledged, but a lot of people have been gaslit into thinking that it actually wasn't that deep, and it's actually not that serious, and it's actually not happening. So that's why we're talking about this now, because it's still happening. So when we're talking about this, we're saying this is still happening, it hasn't been acknowledged. And so we're trying to bring this issue to you guys for that point. Sorry, I just felt like I need to.
No, I think that's an important note to make, because I think that, again, the whole slavery has ended. Slavery keeps evolving. That's what we need to recognize. It evolved from slavery to Jim Crow to, do you know what I mean? Like it keeps
Right.
evolving, and I've noticed that it has gotten more discreet. It's still there. It's just not quote unquote as blatantly obvious as slavery. It
Right.
still has the same impact. Do you know what I mean? It's still impacting these communities.
Yeah.
Because it's sometimes it's also institutional based. Like
Exactly.
what you see happen in the workplace, what you see happen in schools, what you see happen everywhere. So it's like you said, it's discreet, but that doesn't rule out the fact that it's not happening. And of course, it affects, young people, it affects children in maybe schools, it affects adults, and also how this affects adults is also being passed to children in the home.
Yes.
And maybe, I don't know, maybe we talk about like the parenting styles of how like parents have treated their children in response to what has been passed down to them or what they experience outside on a daily basis.
Yeah, going back to Dr. Degruy, the book Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, she has a really good example of how parenting styles have been rooted in survival and has been passed down through generations, evolving into what may appear as cultural norms, right? So an example that she gave that really resonated with me was she told the audience to imagine a child misbehaving in a public setting. So she used a bank, and she said a black parent might feel the need to harshly discipline their child right then and there, not necessarily because the child's behavior warrants it, but because of the internalized fear of how others, like maybe authority figures, might perceive or react to this child. So a lot of times, so we talk about like whoopings or disciplinary action that's in the black community, right? Again, we're moving forward in a way that as a community of like, really reducing disciplinary action, but again, acknowledging where that came from. That whooping came from because we don't want this person, we don't want authority, or we don't want somebody in these settings to intervene, because then that resulted in a lot worse type of disciplinary action, not only for that child, but for that family. So it's important that, again, we understand the historical concept of, again, these adaptive strategies, such as disciplinary action within parenting styles, going back to how everything is rooted in the response towards racism.
I have a very, very vivid picture of of what you just said about a whooping, and I and some of my friends went to Florida for the holidays one time, and we were outside, and we're just strolling, and there was this thing, I can't remember what it's called, like you stay on it and then the camera goes around you, and then you take pictures. And people were waiting in line to get on that, and I can't remember what this girl did. I don't know, like it wasn't obvious to us, maybe it was obvious to the parents, and the mother just spanked her, and I was embarrassed on behalf of the girl. Even my friends were like, no, this is not right, like this is, but of course, who would say, oh, don't do that? That's how they have been, or that's how she decided to instill discipline into the child. Of course, we cannot fault her, but it's also because of what she said, like they don't want somebody else to intervene in saying, oh, your child is uncultured or your child is uncouth, and then they decide to do it themselves, even though in public spaces and how it was done might not be, I don't know if you know what I'm saying, like it might not be acceptable to other people, but that's how she felt it was. She could discipline the child, so it was embarrassing for her and also like for the people around. And then going back to what you said about like parenting styles and how Degruy, I think there was one part where she said that most parents inherit their style of discipline from their parents. And while many parents might try to do it differently, other parents have already, like, it's been instilled in them, and they feel like that is the right way and that's the ultimate way for them to discipline their children. And it's like we've learned in research about how children can, like for instance, children who grow up in domestic violence homes may have the likelihood to, exhibit domestic violence traits. Is the same way that whatever you have put in your child is the same way they are able to, or they have the likelihood to exhibit it. So we need to get off, like, think about ways to adjust this scenario. And it's traumatic, it's passed down, but I still think there are ways, and we're still going to get into that, but I still think there are ways by which we can take ourselves off the equation. Even if it's hard, it's difficult, it's not easy, but it's possible. It can be done.
And we are going to touch upon that. And we're not at any means condoning child abuse. Like, that's not what we're saying. We're being very clear. That's not where it's coming from. But we're talking about historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, adaptive strategies, and how disciplinary action is part of that. And where that derives from. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So just being clear on that. So
And I would even go further to say that I think a lot of people have been conditioned with this thought that they want to be better than their parents, and like I want to do better than my parents, and I want to do better than my parents, but don't always recognize that doing better than your parents isn't the goal. That isn't the stop post. Like, okay, I've done better now, so I didn't whip my child. But then we still have the emotional neglect that is still coming, or the still thought. And Dr. Degruy talks about this in her book as well, when she says, like, there was two parents, and there's a white parent, and there's a black parent, and there are two mothers, and one of them is talking about. Are you gonna talk about this already?
What's that?
You gonna talk about?
No, I'm sorry.
And so there's a white woman, and she's a mom, and then there's a black mom, and they both have two kids, and the black mom is talking about the white child, or the white mother's son, and she's basically giving him all these compliments and saying, like, oh, he's just so good, and he's just so settled, and and all of these things. And she's kind of like, okay,
I am familiar with the story,
And then the white mom is talking about the son, and she's saying similar things, like, oh, he's XYZ, like he's good at this, or he's so smart. And the black mom is like, no, he's so annoying, he gets on my nerves, or whatever it is that she says. Like, and even though in her mind it is a way, it's like, it's still shown, like, that's love, right? In her mind, that's love. And what Degruy talks about is that in the time of slavery, you didn't want your child to be good. Like, you didn't want your child to be perceived as good, or perceived as a great worker, or perceived as anything. So you would talk down on the child so that they wouldn't be taken away. And so, like, we are learning, like, you didn't want this child to have any attention, because then they would be given away or taken. Because we have to remember that slaves were 3/5 of a human. So they didn't have any rights, any real rights of saying, like, no, I want my kid to be here with me. They were bred to work. Like, they were supposed to work. It didn't matter who the father was. It didn't matter what they talked about. Like, they were supposed to be working. And so if I see, like, oh, your child has really good arms, and I think, no, he's so lazy, he just, so it comes from that idea that, like, you don't want something to happen. And so what she was saying was that even though we know that this is deriving from a place of protection, that in that scenario, when the child hears all of these negative things, he's like, well, why can't I just be good? And so now this comes internalized, and you're internalizing these things. And so when we're talking about parenting, we're saying, like, that's much better. This is a much better situation, because now we're in a space where there's a black mom and there's a white mom, and they're able to talk about their kids, but it's not the goalpost. It's not where we stop at, right? Like, we want to make sure that we're allowing our children, especially our black kids, like, really providing them with that love and the effort that we can, and the care that we can. So that's not an example of somebody beating on their kid, right? Or, like, hitting their kid, or disciplining their kid in that way, but it still causes a little bit of damage. It still causes some turmoil, right?
And tell every black child that they're beautiful.
Yeah, I know. Do you remember this video that was shown to us in class, Dr. Silvio's class, where they had a group of like children, and
With
then
the
they
dolls?
yeah, with the dolls, and then they tell them which is beautiful, which is, and then they
Oh
don't.
yeah, the doll test.
Yeah, and they don't like appreciate like that the black doll was beautiful, even as a black child. So it's like all the
They
things,
still choose to be the white doll.
yeah, all the
still
things that have
choose
been
that.
instilled in them. And going off what you said, Van, it's also like an example of if a mother's primary lesson is to adapt
Yes.
around suffering or around maybe
Have
domestic
to.
violence
Yeah.
issues, for instance, and then you also pass that to your child, your female child, and say, oh, if this is happening to you, then you have to adapt, you have to endure, because that was what I endured in my own time. Like now times are different. So it's still, like I said earlier, it's just for us to find a way to heal and like heal from intergenerational trauma. We might not necessarily grow out of it like ASAP, but we need to try our best to heal from that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree.
Yeah,
And I
so like you were saying about healing, which is possible, and the ways by which I think one of the most important ways or one of the most important steps in healing from post-traumatic slave syndrome, it's like recognizing that PTSS exists, that all of these things, people are reacting or people are acting out just because of some underlying issues, like all the things you've said, historical trauma, generational trauma, slavery, and all of that. So we need to realize that it exists. And by the time we realize that it exists, that is when we begin to seek help. And one of the major steps, or one of the major attributes of the healing process, is therapy. Sometimes we don't talk a lot about therapy in the Black community, but let's be real. Therapy and mental health, they're good. Like, they're great. It's not only for people, it's for everyone. And many of us have been like taught to like pray it away or be strong or don't talk to anybody, just keep it in and everything will be fine. No, we need to seek like professional help. And this is not to place blames, but the University of Southern California School of Social Work, in an interview with a clinical associate, Professor Ruth White, talks about the resistance of mental health in the Black community. And one of the things White mentioned is the distrust in health facilities or health institution, and it also still goes back to slavery. For instance, she said like African American adults are 20% more likely to report serious psychological distress, and that's because African Americans have been misdiagnosed in the past than their white counterparts. So
or experimented on.
Yeah, exactly. They've been exploited by the government. They've been exploited by the medical community, and in the name of medical advancement, we know all the things that happened in Tuskegee and all that. But the good thing is that there are Black professionals. There are Black mental health therapists who understand what we have gone through, who have our shared experience.
Yeah.
You know what? The chapter, the Association of Black Social Workers, Buffalo, they're actually working with the Brown Paper Bag, which is a resource for... it's a resource guided by Black businesses related to like many different fields, and they're creating one for mental health practitioners and health practitioners.
Yeah, that's amazing.
See,
that's
because
good.
like you said, because we need these resources.
Yeah, of course we do.
And and to really engage, like really try to overcome, not essentially just that mistrust, but like having that relatability and that comfort in having that relatability with someone.
Yes.
That's giving you the service.
Yes. So from like this is people who have like shared experience, and they can help you in many ways than you can count. And like you said, they're also building that reliability for mental health facilities and for therapy. So therapy should not be a sign of weakness. It's a tool for self-liberation that can help us heal from intergenerational trauma.
I like that, a tool for self-liberation.
Yeah.
You better go off, Joy. You better go off. Okay? All right. Well, you know, we had to give you the history, had to give you all of the information related to like why things have built up to the way they are. Again, talking about those adaptive strategies and things of that nature.
Right.
But we want to talk about the love aspect too. We want to make sure that we are talking about the benefits of healthy Black relationships and how that challenges systematic oppression. And a few things are healthy Black relationships can create stability and security, whether that's emotional or financial. Breaking those cycles of trauma together, creating positive role models within the community, increasing the well-being, creating joy within the Black community,
of course.
creating joy within Black families, and just the overall promotion of community health. So there's a lot of benefits in having healthy Black relationships in the community that does challenge the systematic oppression.
Yeah.
So, we're not just saying this like, be in a relationship because, why not? No, there's a lot of benefits to healthy relationships that really does help the Black community thrive.
Right.
It's so beneficial.
Be in relationships with your community. Like, get in with your community. Like, just to pinpoint again, it does not have to be romantic. Like, be in friendships with people in your community. Be in the community and like making relationships with those that's actually trying to do the work.
Engage.
Yeah.
Engage. If you have like engage in community events. Show healthy traits. Discuss healthy traits. To your comfortability. But share.
Yeah. And so many people get like their thoughts and reflections from social media. But then the good thing is that there are some people on social media who are also showing how Black love can exist. I mean, I follow a group on Instagram. I think it's Black Love. And they have this summit where they talk about like so many things in the Black community that relate to love. So also following these people on social media, these people are trying to rewrite the wrongs that we see in like the media space. And so these are the kind of pages, or these are the kind of tools and resources that we can feed our minds with to know that Black love really exists. And
it does.
Yeah,
it does. All right, and we also have some actionable steps for our listeners today to really assist in creating that healthy relationship dynamics, right? So being transparent, setting boundaries, educating yourself, engaging in healthy conflict resolution. And we talked about all of this when we talked about that spectrum of healthy relationships. So this is just a refresher for those who already listen to our podcast and for those who are new, just really making sure that you're getting these actionable steps, right? Active listening, practice self-awareness, and really emphasizing what Joyce said about seeking professional support. Because what did you say? That's the key to the what?
Yeah, it's a tool to self-liberation.
Okay. She got to say it again. And, and when it comes to the children, the kids, again, modeling healthy relationships, creating safe spaces, teaching proper coping skills, validating emotions. I know you talked about that, Vanity.
Right.
And one of the ones that I found to be one of the most important, celebrating your identity. Celebrating your identity as a Black person.
Bold, Black, and bougie.
Yes. We know right now that there's a lot going on in the country that is, making it so that Black history may not be acknowledged. But we want to make sure that regardless of what is happening on a federal level, we're going to continue to acknowledge our heritage. We're going to continue to acknowledge our achievements. We're going to continue to acknowledge our history because that's part of us. That's part of the American history too. But we won't go on that soapbox today.
Right.
But making sure that we are celebrating our identities, strengthening our identities, strengthening our communities, because we are a beautiful people.
Yes. We are. Do I wrap up now?
Yep.
Oh, okay. So, as we wrap up this conversation, we've talked about so many things. Self-awareness, therapy. The most important thing, like Jen mentioned, is Black love comes not just in romantic ways, but it comes in Black friendship, it comes in familiar relationship, it comes in community groups. And I think we talked about this yesterday, that people can heal also when the community validates their experiences. And I mean, the community can be the church, can be medical institution, can be friendship, can be family. Because if families themselves don't validate your experiences, where do you expect, or how do you expect people to be vulnerable with their feelings? So let us prioritize healing. And I don't know if you've ever seen any pattern where PTSS exists in maybe relationships, and how healing, or how people have gone through healing. Just let us know. Put it in the comment section. We want to hear from you. What do you think about Black love? What do you think about everything that we have said today? And we also want you to use the hashtag Bridge for Love. That's BBRDGE 4, as in figure 4, and then and then Black love. Let's know how you experience Black love. Let's hear your thoughts, because we are here for you, and we're trying to build a community where we can talk to you and get feedback from you as well.
Okay, so while we're ending off, first of all, thank you guys for just listening to us. If you want to contact us or be with or work with us, you can contact us on our website. You can contact us on our social media, because we are on social media as well. For lasting thoughts, we just want to recommend a couple of resources that you guys can utilize for yourselves. Get in community with the people around you. There are a lot of schools that have Black associations at the university. We have some recommendations. All About Love by Bell Hooks. It talks about love and just what that looks like in our relationships, and familial relationships, romantic relationships, and with ourselves. We have Intentionality by our very own Ogechi Kalu.
Okay.
Right? So we have Intentionality. Make sure you go and buy that as well. And then, of course, Dr. Joy Degruy's book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, The American Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing. You can also search on Google, or you can just search in general. They have the Psychology Today, people that might be at your school. There are Black therapists around you. You can search Black therapists around me. You can also look for online options that provide that. Maybe it's not in person, but just there's still a therapist there that can better understand you as well. And so while we're talking about different ways that you can heal and look at different books and things like that, also be the person as well. Be the person that people can come to as well. Provide that space, provide that openness, provide that grace and the kindness, so that people can also just be around you and heal. Thank you, guys. Happy Black History Month. Happy Black History Month.
And have a great and safe Valentine's Day.
Yes.